We're back again with another video, and today we are on day 6 of Singapore Math, or we could say lesson 6. And again, it is Singapore Math. It's in the title, right? But it's the Singapore Primary Math. Oh, need to write better than this. It's the Singapore Primary Math, and it's the US edition. It's the Singapore Primary Math US edition. We're in 4A, and today we're doing page 15 and 16 in the textbook. All right, we're doing 15 and 16 in the textbook, and we're doing exercise 6 in the workbook. All right, that's what we're doing today, and so yeah. All right, so what we want to look at here is we want to look at a nice little timeline, and on our timeline, let's say it goes up from 0 to 400. All right, so let's try to split that into equal parts here. Okay, that's not equal at all. I'm already starting bad, so let's fix that. All right, let's see here. Let's say this is 100. Let's say this is 200. Let's say this is 300. And that is 400. All right, and let's say between each mark we have 9 lines, right? So we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. That's not equal, but let's say that that's what we have throughout each mark, right? So obviously if from 0 to 100 we have 10 lines including 100, then each one represents 10. That's what we want each mark to represent. Okay, maybe let's draw it in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Again, the lines are not equal because, like I've said multiple times before, I'm really bad at drawing. Okay, all right, so let's say that we need to locate 344 on the timeline. 344 on the timeline. If you want, you could try to locate it using my drawing. You could take a minute now and try to see if you could figure out where 344 is. You could pause the video and try to locate it on the screen, and then we'll start that. All right, so if 300 is here and 400 is right here, and we said each mark represents 10, that's what we said before, right? Each mark represents 10, so then this would be 310, 320, 330, 340, and we would say that 344 is just a little, it's not exactly halfway, that would be 345, but it's about there. So we'd say 344 would be somewhere around here. All right, so if I were to ask you what's the closest 10 to 344, right? If we're considering the 10s, obviously the 10 that comes before 344 would be 340, and the 10 that comes after 344 would be 350. So if I ask you what's the closest 10 to 344, why don't you shout it out now? Is it going to be 340 or 350? You tell me. All right, you should see that it would be 340, right? We said anything that's 344 and below. This is what we did in our lesson 5. 340, anything that would be 344 and below would be closer to 340. Anything from 345 go up, right? Anything from 345 go to 350 would be closer to 350. All right, so in this case, if I ask you what's the nearest 10 to 344, you will tell me 340. All right, what if I ask you what is the closest 100 to 344, right? It means that in this case, you're not considering the 10s anymore. You're not considering 340 and 350. Instead, you're considering, is 344 closer to 300 or is it closer to 400? How will you know? All right. You have to tell yourself that between 300 and 400, there are a total of 100 units, right? And half of 100 would be 50. So the halfway point between 300 and 400 would be 350. Now, does 344 come before 350 or after 350? You tell me. Does 344 come before 350, like closer to 300, or does it come after 350, like closer to 400? You should see that 344 obviously comes closer, right? Because it's before 350. Let me try to erase something here so that this doesn't look as confusing as it does. Nope, I don't want to clear the whole page. I just want to erase this. Right? I want to erase this. All right, and I want you to see that you should see that 344 will come closer. It comes before 350, right? So it will come closer to 300. So the closest 100, so the closest 100, right, to 344 would be 300. Okay, all right. Now, how about if we think of another timeline? Let's see here. Let's say that we had a timeline where we had 300 here and 400 here, right? So obviously 350 would be somewhere in the middle. What if I said to you, what's the closest 100 to 375? What would you do, right? Why don't you take a minute, look at it, try to see if you can come up with the answer, pause the video, and then come back in. All right, you should see here that 375, the halfway point between 300 and 400 is 350. 375 is higher or more than 350, right? It's more than half the halfway point. 375 is closer to 400. So if you were to round 375 to the closest 100, you should see that it would be approximately 400. All right, let's look at another one. All right, so let's say now we had a timeline that went from 400 to 500. What's the halfway point? The halfway point is somewhere around here. It would be 450. What if I ask you what's the closest 100 to 449? All right, obviously 449 comes right before 450, around here. What's the closest 100? Would you round up 449 or would you round down 449? All right, round up to 500 or round down to 400. What would you do? All right, based on everything that we discussed, 449 comes before 450, so you would actually round it down. All right, so 449 is approximately to the let's say that 449 to the nearest 100 is going to be 400. All right, what if we had the same timeline now again between 400 and 500? We said the halfway point is going to be 450. What if now I ask you what's 451 to the closest 100? What would you do this time? You should see that 451 comes after or between 450 and 500. Let's put it, that's what I mean by after 450. I mean somewhere between 450 and 500. So we will round up 451 to 500. We will say that 451 to the nearest 100 would be 500. Here's the question to you now. Let me just erase this. What if I ask you what's 450 to the nearest 100? All right, so let's see the question that I'm asking you. I'm asking you what is 450 to the nearest 100? All right, based on what we looked at in our previous lesson, any number that's at the halfway point, you have to round it up to the higher number. All right, we looked at that when we were looking at numbers between 0 and 10, and we were rounding to the nearest 10, right? We said that, look, if you had a timeline that was between 0 and 10, how do you round 5? Do you round it down to 0 or do you round it up to 10? All right, and based on what we saw before, we said that if you had the number 5, you would round it up to the higher number, right? So 5, if you said what's the nearest 10 to 5, we would say it would be 10. All right, in the same way, if we had 450 and somebody asked us to round 450 to the nearest 100, we would say the nearest 100 to 450 would be 500. We round it up. Okay, let's look at one more example here. What if we had the timeline between 0 and 100? We know the halfway point between 0 and 100 would be 50. Okay, what if I ask you, how do you round 32? Do you round 32 up to 100 or do you round it down to 0? If you had to round 32 to the nearest 100, which of these would apply? Why don't you take a second and shout it out? Let me know your answer. you should see that 32 actually comes between 0 and 50. So 32 is before this halfway point of 50. So if you were rounding 32, you would round it down to 0. All right, now that we've done that preview, let's look at page number 15 in the textbook. Page number 15, and like I said at the beginning, we're doing 15 and 16 in the textbook. All right, so on page number 15, you have task number 4, you have 4A. All right, in 4A, we're given 2460 is one end of the timeline, and 2490. In between here, we have 2470, and then we have 2480. All right. And the first question in 4A, they're asking us if we had the number 2478, how do we round that to the nearest 10? I want you to pause the video now, take a second, do it, and then come back in. If you look at the tens value, right, this last number here, this last tens and ones is 78. You see your nearest tens would be 70 and 80. I know it's 2,470 and 2,480, but we're looking at the last two digits. All right, is 78 closer to 80, or is it closer to 70? Based on everything we saw, we know it's closer to 80. All right, so 2478 to the nearest 10 would be approximately 2480. All right, now we're going to look at this same timeline, but instead of rounding to the nearest 10, we're going to round to the nearest 100. All right, so let's say we had a chart here where we had 2300 on this end, 2600 here, and in between we had 2400 and we had 2500 here. All right, so if we look at that 2478, it will be somewhere after 2450, obviously. So it will be here 2478, and we're being asked, how do you round this? We're being asked to round to the nearest 100. All right, we know the number is 2478. If we look at the last three digits from the hundreds digits, we know that the hundreds 2478 is between 2400 and 2500. Which number is it closer to? Well, we could look and we see 2450 is the center point. Anything that's below 2450 would be rounded down to 2400. Anything that's 2450 and above would be rounded up to 2500. 2478 is more than 2450, so we round up. So 2478 to the approximate 100 would be 2500. And I should have made you pause the video and do it on your own before I continue on. Sometimes I forget. Just know that if we're ever doing a question at any point, you pause the video and do it on your own and then come back in. But don't worry, you'll get more other chances to do this yourself. All right, now again, we are on page number 15, and right now we're doing task 5 or question 5. All right, and we're told that Mr. Ricci or Ricci, however you choose to say that, he sold his car for $34,125. Must be a nice car. And we want to see what's this number rounded to the nearest 100. So you go ahead, I'm going to remember this time. You go ahead and pause the video, go ahead and do the question, and then come back in. All right, so between 34,000 and 35,000, because you can see this number here is 34,125 in terms of the thousands, we're somewhere between 34,000 and 35,000. All right, let's see. We actually didn't have to write 35,000, but that's fine. Let's say 34,100 is here, 34,200, 34,300, and so on until we get up to 35,000. We know that 34,000, this is 125 is the last three digits, right? So 34,125 has to be somewhere between 34,100 and 34,200. Okay, it's somewhere between these numbers, and we actually have to determine, is it closer to 34,100 or is it closer to 34,200? So what I would say is determine your halfway point. Between 34,100 and 34,200, the halfway would be 34,150. All right. Where would 34,125 be on our timeline? Would it be before 34,150 or after 34,150? As you can see here, 125 is smaller than 150. All right, so 34,125, let's erase this to make it simpler. 34,125 would be somewhere here. And you ask yourself, 34,125, is it closer to 34,100 or is it closer to 34,200? And the answer is that 34,125 is closer to, or is approximately to, the nearest 100 would be 34,100, which is the answer that you should have gotten. All right, if you turn to page 16 on number 6, all right, so page 16, that's the page we're on, and we're doing task 6 or question 6. All right, and they gave us a timeline, and they're giving us different numbers, and they're telling us to round it to the nearest 100. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to do 6A with you, and then after that you can do the rest of them on your own. If you have any trouble, ask your parents to help you with it. Okay, so we're going to say 345, but we want to know 345, and we want to round it to the nearest 100. Round to nearest 100. All right, so what we have here is we have 345 is somewhere obviously between 300 and 400. How do I know that? Well, the digit in the hundreds place is 3, right? So we must know that it's either we're rounding down to 300 or we're rounding up to 400. What I would say is find the halfway point between 300 and 400. The halfway point is 350. And they're asking us, what does 345 do? Does it round up to 400 or do we round it down to 300? Obviously, on our timeline, you can see that it comes before 350, right? So if it comes, we said anything that's below 350, we're going to round down to 300, and anything that is above 350, we're going to round up to 400. So 345 is before 350 on the timeline, so we're going to round it down to 300. All right, so that's the answer for part A. For part, go ahead and do B, C, D, and E of question number 6. All right, so just to go over the answers with you now for part B of 6. So this is 6B, you should have gotten 3,700. For part C, you should have gotten 4,900. For part D, you should have gotten 27. Let's see. You should have gotten 27,100. And for part E, you should have gotten 42,600. So what you're doing now that we've done page 16 and that's task 6, now you have to do in the textbook, page 16, you have to do task number 7. All right. Again, your parents should have the teacher's manual, which gives the answers for these questions, or you should be able to work it with a parent. If you can't, put a comment down below and I will put the answers in there. After you do page 16, task 7, you go to the workbook and do exercise 6. And that's it for today. All right, so please like, comment, subscribe, and have an awesome day. Bye.